pigs, and statues or idols. So those are all prohibited to sell. And it was said, O Messenger of Allah, what about the fat of carrion? So for instance, like unslaughtered dead cows, for instance, or other animals, what about their fat? And they said that these are used as like a lacquer on boats, and they're used to oil pelts, to oil hides, and they're also people use them for lamps. So they would use that oil in order to burn in their lamps. And he said, no, it's forbidden. And then Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, may Allah fight or curse the Yahud. Allah prohibited them from the fat, and then they started using it and selling it and consuming its price. So what's understood from that is that all of the unslaughtered dead animal is impure, and thus it's not able to be sold for its impurity. And that's an understanding that the Shafi'is understood from that. And also dogs are prohibited to sell due to their bodily impurity. So something must be pure or able to be purified by washing. So if you buy something impure that is affected by filth, like clothing for instance, that was dyed with an impure dye, and then you can wash it afterwards and use it in a pure state, then that is permissible. But something that is itself filth, or that is a liquid that is impure, so you can't purify it by washing, that may not be sold. Manure, that's an excellent question. What about manure? They say that is actually not property, it's called ikhtisas. Like it's something, it's an object, the use of which you're entitled to, though you don't call it your property. And the way you get rid of it is you say, I'll lift my hand from this pile of manure for $50. And it's not called a sale, but you're basically, it's yours, you gathered it from your cattle or whatever, and so-and-so can haul it off, and you'll allow him to do so, because you're entitled to it, for X amount of money or what have you. And that's the same way you do with a dog. So it's called ikhtisas, it's called something that you're entitled to the use of, and you free yourself, or you allow the other person to take it into their use rather than yourself for a fee. And that's how you get rid of it and make use of it. But as a sale, it's an invalid sale. So something pure that be of benefit. Of benefit, and that is of benefit in the sacred law. So what do they mean by that? Something that is useful as opposed to something that is forbidden or useless. So for instance, selling alcohol is not permissible because it's useless in the sacred law. Selling pigs, similarly. Akramakumullah. Selling forbidden instruments, such as guitars, in the view of the Shafi'is, is not permissible as well. They have a use, but it's not deemed useful by the sacred law. So one may not sell those. It has to be useful in the sight of the sacred law. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And there's a lot of things nowadays that are sold that Allahu A'lam if they're of use in the sacred law. So for instance, a video game called Grand Theft Auto. Is that of use? Allahu A'lam, it wouldn't seem so. It wouldn't seem so. They mention like the books of certain heretical groups or disbelieving groups or philosophers. So like that, certain like forbidden information is not deemed useful by the sacred law, so that can't be sold. And so one has to be careful. And from that it's understood that and the reason for that is you can't waste the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. It's actually prohibited to just throw away money. You can't just take, somebody gave you something of value, you can't just go down to the bay and throw it in the bay because you feel like it. It's haram to do that. It's prohibited to waste wealth. So taking something that's of no benefit and then just using it and Allah knows best, is not permissible. Yes, there's a question.
What about makeup or if clothes if you don't need them? What about makeup or clothes if you don't need them?
You mean selling them or giving them away, or which?
Like selling or buying if you have makeup or clothes that the person doesn't need. Is that considered not useful?
The person doesn't need the clothes? You mean they're purchasing something that's excessive?
Selling makeup. Makeup is very useful.
Makeup's useful. Makeup's useful. Inna Allaha jamilun yuhibbul jamal. That Allah is splendid and He loves splendor, subhanahu. So selling makeup is permissible because a lady who's married, may use it for a very beneficial purpose in the sacred law of matrimonial happiness, and that's fine. It may be sold. Naam. La ilaha illallah. So he said, pure, useful, and C, fully owned. You could also say that means that both parties are authorized to conduct the transaction. So, for instance, your neighbor, if he knows you want to sell your lawnmower, and someone drives by and says, I saw in the classified ad that they're trying to sell a lawnmower at this address, and you haven't authorized him to sell it, he can't sell it. He can't sell it for you. They call that the sale of someone who's a busybody. So you have to be authorized to conduct the sale. So similarly, if your parents are selling something and you know it, but they haven't authorized you, you can't conduct the sale. And so most of the people we deal with in stores, they're not the owners of that, but they're authorized by the owner of the store to conduct that transaction. So thus you can conduct the transaction with them. But if it's someone who hasn't been authorized, obviously they cannot sell someone else's property without their authorization. Fully owned, and then we added 2. And those were that you must be able to receive it. So the seller has to be able to turn it over to you, or you have to be able to get it. So for instance, a house that squatters have occupied, you can sell it to someone who's able to throw them out, because he's able to receive it. That's the sell it to some of the brothers. They can receive it, or it has to be able to be given to you. And the last one is La ilaha illallah, that it has to be known. So the object itself has to be known, or its quantity, and its description. So selling something that is unknown, either it hasn't been seen or it hasn't been quantified and properly described, is not permissible. So that's important, because there are types of sales where that'll happen, or if the person doesn't pay attention, they can slip into that kind of contract. It has to be seen, and then if you're just looking at this book, or you're looking at this watermelon and you can see it. But if you didn't see it, for instance, and they say, I'll sell you a watermelon of this type, it weighs so and so many pounds, they could do that because it's been properly described and quantified. But if it's just totally undefined, you can't, because again, in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ prohibited sales in which there is some sort of deception. And an example of that is contracts where one side of the contract is entirely undefined. And those are like insurance agreements. So an insurance agreement technically is invalid. However, we engage in some of them here, some types of them here, because we're forced to by the legal situation, and otherwise we'd be fined. So that's technically an invalid transaction because one side of it is unknown. You know the monthly fee, but you don't know whether or not you're going to receive anything in exchange for it. And if you are going to receive something in exchange for it, it's not necessarily quantified. It might be quantified within a general range, but not specifically quantified. And the Prophet ﷺ, he prohibited transactions in which there is some deception or some impurity. So that for that reason, insurance contracts are invalid. And also, La ilaha illallah, we should take ourselves an insurance policy from the one who can really guarantee our safety and that things will be alright, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as taught by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So we were reading this chapter with one of our sheikhs, and he said, take a policy from the corporation or from Sayyidina Muhammad's company, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught us invocations for which Allah promised that He'll protect us and our property. So for instance, Abu Darda, they came to him and they said that your house burned down. He said, my house didn't burn down. There was a fire in his neighborhood and they came and rushed, and it's an emergency. Your house burned down. No, my house didn't burn down. And then they came a little while later and said, every time the fire got close to your house, it went out. And he said, I knew Allah wouldn't do that. Meaning I knew that Allah would allow my house to burn down. So then they were kind of, they were kind of tripped out. They're amazed at why. We're not sure which of the things you said was more strange. That you were sure your house didn't burn down, or that you said Allah wouldn't have done that. And he said that's because of a saying that the Prophet ﷺ taught me. And he taught him this invocation and said that if a person says this in the day, his self and his children and his wealth would be safe until the evening. And if he said it in the night, until the morning. So because he had said that, he was sure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't have burned down his house. So that's an insurance that you can be confident of. Otherwise, the financial crisis is a good proof that you can't be confident in insurance companies, because in an instant, nothing. That's proof to the truthfulness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech in the Quran. Allah said, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا, that Allah obliterates usurious gain. And that's exactly what happened. In an instant, not millions, not billions, trillions, perhaps, of dollars disappeared and nobody knew where they went. That's mahq, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it in the Quran. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا, that Allah obliterates interest or usurious gain. وَيُرْبِ الصَّدَقَاتِ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes charity to grow. So if you want something to be confident in of what you've given away in charity. And if you want some insurance, take insurance from the one who can really guarantee, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the tongue of His Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Yes?
Does that mean that insurance it's unlawful to have insurance? Or?
We're in a situation of compulsion because of the law. Yeah. But, yeah.
But voluntary insurance.
But voluntary, they have like funds that you can pay into in the Muslim world, where a group of people pay into a fund, and there's like a gentleman's agreement to assist each other in cases. So there's ways around it, but just as it's conducted here, those are contracts that, because one end of it is open-ended, they're not valid contracts.
And stocks.
Stocks, we will cover partnerships, and stocks are treated like a type of partnership. Though, admittedly, the Hanafi school in modern finance is a lot more practical. So most of the modern fatwas, or many of the more competent modern fatwas you're going to find about that, will be in the Hanafi school. And we're in touch, fortunate, with someone who's competent there. So, inshallah, we can maybe convey some of our questions. Manure, that's an excellent question. What about manure? They say that is actually not property, it's called ikhtisas. Like it's something, it's an object, the use of which you're entitled to, though you don't call it your property. And the way you get rid of it is you say, I'll lift my hand from this person. Able to be purified by washing. So if you buy something impure that is affected by filth, like clothing, for instance, that was dyed with an impure dye, and then you can wash it afterwards, and use it in a pure state, then that is permissible. But something that is itself filth, or that is a liquid that is impure, so you can't purify it by washing, that may not be sold. Pigs and statues or idols, so those are all prohibited to sell. And it was said, O Messenger of Allah, what about the fat of carrion? So for instance, like unslaughtered dead cows, for instance, or other animals, what about their fats? And they said that these are used as like a lacquer on boats, and they're used to oil pelts, to oil hides, and they're also people use them for lamps. So they would use that oil in order to burn in their lamps, and he said, no, it's forbidden. And then Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, may Allah fight or curse the Yahud. Allah prohibited them from the fat, and then they started using it and selling it and consuming its price. So what's understood from that is that all of the unslaughtered dead animal is impure, and thus it's not able to be sold for its impurity. And that's an understanding that the Shafi'is understood from that. And also dogs are prohibited to sell due to their bodily impurity. So something must be pure and or